has a jacket. I keep my jacket.
Oh, wait, you know this way. Okay.
But you know what I don't have is I don't have any swag. So we have, Cisco blaring out.
Okay, all right. We need to hand out mics.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Is this working?
We will be once he gets back.
Oh, okay. Good morning. I see that it's a little bit less now again, but I think the late arrivals were probably the first ones off the bus last night on the way back from the Guinness. It was a stop at O'Donoghue's, I think, on the way. So, and just Laura wanted me to tell everyone that there's some questions about the working groups tomorrow. They're all full. Workshops tomorrow. They're all full. So, sorry. Sign up earlier next time. So this morning, we're just going to dive a little bit into the field program. So maybe take things to that kind of ground level a little bit more. So we have a great group of panelists here, a couple of which have come from the field to talk about the work that we've been doing on the ground. So hopefully to bring that back around to that perspective on things and really talk about field operations. So we have a group here we have Grace from Mercy Corps, John, Tim, Ray, and Rami from my team at NetHope, and Sulin from Cisco. But I'll let each of them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves. So maybe we could start with Grace.
Hey everyone, my name is Grace Beckton, and I'm the West Nile team leader for Mercy Corps. So I'm based up in northern Uganda on the border of South Sudan, managing our refugee response.
My name is John Crowley. I'm the Director of Information Management and Crisis Informatics at NetHope. Joined just over the summer, so I'm beginning to discover where things lie and where things are going.
Hi, my name is Tim Timbiti. I'm based in Uganda. I'm NetHope's program manager for the USA GBI program.
Good morning, I'm Ray Short. I'm NetHope's Director of Institutional Partnerships. Nice to meet you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sulin Hinton. I manage Cisco's tactical operations team, which does emergency communications.
It works. Okay. I'm Rami Chakra with NetHope. I look after field operations, which includes emergency preparedness and emergency response as well.
Great, thanks. I thought you guys would talk a lot longer, especially some of you. So now I have to talk again. This is a really simple picture of how I've only been here for 2 months. I'm trying to figure out how we do things at NetHope and how we do field programs in particular. So this is a very simplified image of what I think things look like. I've been told it's very IT oriented and coming from that, and that's where I come from, so that's kind of how I see things, I guess. But I think it's sort of showing how we build on what we do. And starting from the simplest thing that we do in the field is really to provide technology connectivity, the infrastructure, the power that we need to at least get the most basic services back online. And that's something that NetHope has done from the very beginning with partners and members, and it's something that we will continue to need to do. I don't think we're going to walk into so many situations where, maybe there's going to be some situations where that's working, but a lot of the times we have to start there and then build up. And we're going to try to work on how we build on what we have from that point. And so once we have that technology and infrastructure in place, how then do we kind of start using the data and the information that we're getting from the members, from whoever else is on the ground, and from the infrastructure we're putting in place to make more informed decisions and for other new ideas that we can use that data for. And then of course on top of that and linked to that would be real digital services. So how do we get that transformation on the ground as well, not just in HQ and the way we do things as an organization, but how do we get the programs themselves to really think more digitally? So before we move into the speakers, I also want to just show a quick video on what we were doing on the preparedness side of things. That's another part to think about is getting people also ramped up in their skills, not just the technology itself, but how people use that. So we had a course this past summer in Panama with some members and partners in NetHope to try to bring up the skill sets in the technology area as well. So we'll play the video now.
Communications is a lifeline of emergency response. So if you do have connectivity, you have communications, and then with that, you're able to respond a lot more efficiently.
Bringing the technologists into this space where they can experience humanitarian action, and it gives them training necessary for having an effective response operation sometime in the future.
We're trying to put them through the whole gamut, from deploying in austere environments to setting up technologies that we use throughout disaster responses for communications, including things like wireless networks, data connectivity, voice services, and things of that nature.
Facebook is at a disaster response training session because participating in providing connectivity after a crisis is something that is very closely related to the mission of the company. We're actively building an internal roster of Facebook volunteers.
Our staff really give their hearts out, especially in times of need. We do provide access to highly skilled individuals who are able to provide a ton of capacity to this organization.
Unfortunately, it's inevitable, but there will be more emergencies, there will be more natural disasters. And what we're doing, this training, is part of building the capacity of our future responders.
I absolutely feel like I'm ready to be deployed. In just 48 hours, we had formed a team and formed the systems in place to get people connected.
And we were certainly stretched to our limits, physically and mentally. And I feel that the best thing is, that we're much more prepared now to deploy, given how well they actually simulated a real-life disaster response.
This is not just a training for the Caribbean hurricane. The plan is to replicate this across the other regions.
So you saw a few familiar faces, I think, in that video. But I think starting maybe at the bottom of the pyramid I showed before, really the most worst case scenario, let's say, is maybe disaster response. And NetHope's been involved in that from the beginning and involved with that very much with Cisco, TAC Ops. And so I just wanted to give Rami and Sulin a chance to discuss how we do these things. So Rami, can you give us some examples of how NetHope has collaborated with partners in emergency response and preparedness?
Yes, thank you, Brent. So there's a lot of examples, and let's start with Puerto Rico. I think that was a very good example of going into Puerto Rico. The Cisco office, for example, Cisco Puerto Rico, immediately took us in and provided us with office space. But the problem was the families of the employees were in these offices after the hurricane. And not only that, they were able to give us access directly to all these suppliers in Puerto Rico. So we were able to very quickly assess and find out who's doing what. And then there was a lot of volunteers from our partners coming in. Cisco TAC Ops, I can't say enough about them, but they're really been strong in deploying with NetHope. They were with us throughout until the end of the year before we got in a local team. But then also Ericsson Response came in as well. And we had Facebook and Google send in people. Red 52 is another satellite provider coming out of Mexico, which was great. So I think that was, for me, Puerto Rico is whatever good relationships we had with partners even improved. And what's even better was we created new partnerships. We have, for example, we talk about Ericsson Response, a newcomer. We talk about Vanu also, Red 52. So I think this is a very good example of how, we all worked very well together. And I don't think NetHope can do what we do and achieve what we've achieved in preparedness or in response without the members and the partners. From a member's perspective, in Puerto Rico, for example, Samaritan's Purse and Save the Children were really, really key because they provided us with support for warehousing space and office spaces. And this is the type of collaboration that we need. So this is where we reach out to our members and our members take us in, our partners work with us. So of course there's a donation of equipment. There's also solutions for technologies that we had with Facebook. Information is aid. How do we communicate with communities and receive information, share information? Alternative energy. Power was a huge issue. And thanks to Microsoft, for example, for the donation of solar panels, we were able to provide power to 12 schools working with Save the Children to keep our communications equipment up. So I think these are just some examples, and then there's of course Northern Uganda where Eutelsat helped us out with donation of VSATs, and MTI as a member received the equipment and helped with the storage and distribution, and there's lots of examples.
Yeah, thanks.
Everybody, you want to hold the mics up close to your face.
So Sue-Lin, maybe you can expand a bit on that from a partner's perspective, and also maybe talk a little bit about how that relationship has evolved over the years with NetHope.
Sure, absolutely. So from a corporate perspective, what's interesting is in the business world, we're often competitors with each other, but in these disaster response operations, all of that really goes away. We're all there for the same purpose. We work together. It doesn't matter which company you work for, which partner you work for, we're all there for the same reason. So that's really the beauty of those kinds of partnerships. And from a relationship perspective, as you said, Brent, Cisco and NetHope have been partners from the very, very start. Initially for us, it started out as technology training. We were very focused on, getting NetHope members in and getting them trained on some of the solutions. We brought a bunch of them to our RTP office many, many years ago and did some training around the technologies. And that's really evolved over the years because we realize it's not just the technology, right? A lot of times we say the technology is the easy part. It's everything else that you have to deal with in these disaster situations that is the challenge. So our relationship has developed where we're doing training together. We're forming a rapid response team. We're doing operational training together and really learning, from an overall perspective, working together to better operate at these disasters.
Great, thanks. So Rami, how do you think NetHope could improve working with partners and actually adding more value to the members?
Well, build on what we've started already with the rosters, for example. There's a huge gap in resources that we can have some support from the partners, whether it's their personnel, technical solutions really. So if you look at sometimes, how do we come up with solutions to be able to communicate and provide services with communities. So these are things that members also need some support with. So I think there's, we've started with the capacity building and the rosters, and then of course the technologies that they offer to solve the problems that our members are having. I think we should just do more of that. I think there's a lot of need there, and there's a lot of potential as well to, to grow even further than where we are right now.
Okay, great. And Sue-Lin, from a partner's perspective, is there anything that NetHope could do to be more effective with partners in it?
Sure, absolutely. So, I think one of the things that NetHope brings to the table is the variety and the breadth of their member organizations, right? So we have technologies that we can bring to the table, but without understanding truly what are the problems that each of these partners and member organizations face, whether it be physical, political, all these kinds of issues that they face, those solutions, we need to be able to tailor that to what the members are facing. So if NetHope can give us insight, with these kinds of things and challenges that the members are facing, I think that the partner organizations can then come up with technologies and solutions and applications that can help the members to address those problems.
Great. So for both of you, maybe Sue-Lin, you can start. I mean, how important is the preparedness part in disaster response, do you think?
I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be prepared before the disaster, right? So in a previous life, I was a volunteer firefighter, and I liken the disaster response a lot to what we do in the fire service. So when you go pull up on the house fire and the flames are out the roof and the people are hanging out the second and third story window screaming for help, that is not the first time that you better be putting on the turnout gear and operating the hose, right? You better know what you're doing. And the disaster response is the same way. It's so chaotic when you get on the scene. There's no infrastructure, there's no nothing, and your team has to be able to get in there and operate smoothly like a well-oiled machine. You better know your capabilities as well as your limitations, and that only comes through training.
Great, thanks. And Rami?
I think the better you prepare, the better you respond. And I think there's a lot of effort that can go into preparation. If you look at the people side, there's a capacity building. There's also a first response team that NetHope has worked on, mainly with Icelandic search and rescue team. And this is a team that goes in very early on, within 72 hours at least, to do an assessment and then even deploys services and scale up on that. And then you have the equipment, the pre-positioning of equipment. The first responders are on the ground usually. So you want the equipment to be in the right hands before the international community comes in. But I think now we're seeing some new trends as well in terms of countries not wanting as much maybe international assistance as they did before. So now our focus needs to shift towards building the capacities of the first responders on the ground, making sure they have enough equipment at least to get the first phase going, provide some communications to facilitate the aid coming in.
Okay. And what role would you see members playing in this preparedness part? We talked a bit about partners and NetHope, but maybe the members have a role to play there as well.
A huge role, because they are the ones we're trying to support, and they're the ones who are on the ground. So I think the better we can prepare members and support them to respond, then even working with communities as well, I think that would be great. I think for us, if we are able to see services come up before we even get on the ground, working with our members, that would be ideal.
Okay.
And from our perspective, the members are the ones that have the local knowledge, right? So when we come in and we can get somebody that has a local office, they know the way around, they know the challenges are in that location, and they know the people to contact already, that's a huge help.
That's great. And just to shift to, I guess, what's coming up as well. We see now that there's a lot of Venezuelan migrants coming into Colombia, and we're planning to try to do something to support the work of our members on the Colombian side. Can you get into a little bit about what we're planning to do there and the next steps, Rami?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've been waiting to deploy to Colombia. Hopefully, first Colombia to support the Venezuelan migrants. So we all know that there's a huge influx into the South American countries, and there's a need. I was there. Crossing both sides and waiting and seeing there's a huge need that I think unfortunately we have not really supported from an international perspective, but now we're in a good position thanks to Cisco again and Facebook for the equipment and funding donations that we're able to come in. So what we've done is we've worked with our members to identify the needs, mainly around power, connectivity, and also equipment, but then also information with the communities, information as aid. So you have all of these migrants coming in, destined to Peru, Ecuador, Brazil. What information do they need in order to go to these places? Our members on the ground are overwhelmed with the amount of people that are coming in, whether it's connectivity or whether it's supporting, providing information. So we have now prioritized between 30 and 40 sites, and we will be deploying, starting from next week, I'll be going there. And then hopefully following up with Facebook, who will also be deploying personnel to deploy these services.
Okay, great. And Sulin, before you answer as well, but just to add a little bit extra in there, I think that, traditionally we've done a lot of disaster response, so sudden onset emergency response. So now we're working a lot more in migrant crises or refugee crises. So maybe in Colombia, it's a good example of that different tone of an emergency, and maybe if there's been a different approach from the partner side on that kind of crisis.
Yeah, there has, and it's really been an evolution from our perspective too, from Cisco's perspective. Like you said, initially we were focused largely on the disaster responses, and then starting with the European refugee crisis back in 2015 was really the first time that we started, deploying the Wi-Fi and the personnel for a non-disaster situation. And so that's kind of developed from there. And so in terms of Venezuela, we are also preparing, Meraki has donated the equipment for the initial set of sites that they're going to go down and address. As well, Cisco's provided some funding for that. And we are prepared also to send personnel for the assessment team and installation teams going forward.
Okay. So we'll shift gears a little bit more, maybe to that middle part of that triangle that I showed earlier, and start to ask John a little bit about his expertise area. John has a lot of expertise in data, in informatics, and crisis. So, John, I just want to ask, with all that experience that you have, what is the state of the practice in the humanitarian sector with data, and where do you see that kind of going forward?
It's a complicated question. We have, in the sector, our data has not necessarily been the best formatted for bringing it all together. We often fragment it. One of the biggest data archives, I think, in humanitarian action is our email inboxes. We email spreadsheets. Most of the time we're emailing with staff in the field. We're sending data back and forth in very traditional 1990s ways. What we've seen emerging is a shift towards different types of data processing. And some of that has come from international institutions and governments, which have been involved in the Open Government Partnership and other areas of open government, where we see open data sets coming out. And these are in open formats and open schemas. We can usually interact with them programmatically via application programming interfaces and get at them in ways that enable us to fuse that information and get good baseline information usually. And then the geospatial work has really been transformative, not only because we're now able to pull this together into an application where we can visualize it over time and space, but because we're able to constantly have updates on a dynamic situation and have a very API-driven development, whether you're looking at the proprietary or the open source side of that equation. When we look at some of the private sector data, I don't know whether you may have a couple slides there.
You have to tell me when to switch to your slides.
In advance. We're used to dealing with population data, which is incredibly coarse. We go to one of the various portals and we begin to pull down baseline information. If we could just advance. Maybe it's as good as this. This is a long way in Malawi. But the private sector, if you could advance one, is getting us high resolution population models based on the devices we carry in our pockets every day. That kind of power and that kind of resolution and the ability to update this every day, as opposed to once a decade, is a transformative effect for us, and we can begin to use that private sector data to begin mapping the data that we have from baseline to what we're comparing with from our devices and asking new sets of questions. Is it right? Are we that far off? Or is the private sector data something that's telling us there's a dynamic we didn't know about? And maybe we need to ask our field staff, is this something you're seeing? And understand that their practical knowledge is not permeated back into the system. And yeah, in fact, they're pretty well aware of it. And then humanitarian data, most of our networks and most of our enterprise systems have been set up for the people who have @org name type authentication. When we created the cluster system after the Pan-Asian tsunami, the problem, or Pan-Indian Ocean tsunami, the problem of getting information across organizations has been like a big challenge in data, because we have systems that are oriented vertically and a coordination mechanism that's oriented horizontally. And that is really where a lot of the tension in the state of data is right now, is like, how do we solve that problem as we go under increasing security, increasing compliance motives, which are necessary to meet our obligations under protection, at the same time that we're under extreme need to be better coordinated and in a mode where we know what each other's doing so we can be more effective and more efficient.
And you mentioned the challenges across organizations, but obviously there's probably challenges internally as well. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges between, let's say, the headquarters and the field operations, and how the data could be different there?
There's never been tension between the headquarters and the field.
No, never.
Often the need of different things. Headquarters, if you're driving decisions that you need to make an appeal decision on releasing funds or personnel, the timeline for that is something where oftentimes the data is not in place in order to drive the decision. You're making a decision under uncertainty. Many times we're seeing sort of a dashboard-like approach to provide at least baseline information and some dynamic approach, and feeding that decision-making structure is something where information managers are struggling, because many times the field is being asked for that information in ways which is just unpredictable, or it's a function of that particular disaster and what it needs to be formed as. Field staff are also not necessarily getting the contextual information. Headquarters can be a bit of a black hole, and many times things flow in, but decisions flow out. It's not data that flows out. The aggregation of information and contextualizing it in ways that are practical, are probably printable, and can be annotated by hand and then returned. We in our digital revolution, we keep carrying around tablets, but honestly, a pen and paper is pretty damn effective, and the ability to get it get it out so that we're supporting decision-making structures like what Sulin and Rami are talking about, it's got to be simple and practical. And sometimes we get lost in our digital quest, and we lose how hard it is to get it to be simple, elegant, and practical, and probably on paper.
Great, thanks. So where are we going with all of this, and what do IMs and data scientists need to do to be more effective?
So many of us have just begun the process of bringing data scientists into organizations or bringing information managers who have stronger data analytics capacities. It's possible to do many things in Excel. I love Excel. But it is not, it's sort of like if you train someone, like I'm a conservatory trained musician. So if you go to conservatory and you're playing on an electric keyboard and you get to the point where you go to conservatory, you're going to play on a real piano. And there comes a point with data scientists, if they're coming in and you're hiring a PhD data scientist, don't give them an electric keyboard. And I've seen this too many times where the expectation is that the data scientist will use the enterprise stack as opposed to having the specialized tools that they need. More and more we're beginning to see tools that enable collaboration across ways which are entirely new for the humanitarian sector. If you could just advance one, or actually advance two, sorry. The idea that we can begin to mix narrative and code, the ability to take a notebook, which is not something that simply includes the reference to code, but actually is code. And we can mix this and begin to build up a mechanism for sharing our methodologies and for beginning to build up a sense that we can build the libraries of software with explanations embedded into it is becoming something that is pretty common in data science, but we don't usually do in humanitarian action. We're actually pretty bad at mixing this. We usually have a 150-page document that we send alongside of the data set, rather than having the narrative that very specifically says, this is how I've structured my analysis and these are my methods. Here's the data set, this is the API I'm pulling from, here's the code and the code library I'm using, and this is how I'm coming up with my analysis. And then coming up with some kind of an insight that we can share and then fork. And then bring in a community and continue to build up these methods. This is where I think we're beginning to see an extension of our ability to fuse information across organizations, bring all of the things that we're doing together, but it's really part of the early revolution. And that process of enabling this community, I think something that we need to sit and talk about, and like how do we bring the isolated data scientists together, give them some new tools that enable them to share the methods, embed our ethical code with the software code, and begin this process of pulling together our insights and sharing them. This is where I think a lot of where we're going. It sounds very abstract, but because the outputs become insights that can pull in all of these resources we've been talking about this week and feed them to our leaders in visualizations that are simple and they can understand, we sort of have to accept that there's going to be a musician who's going to be doing some really complicated analysis of the composition, and then coming up on stage and performing something that's much more simple. We have to enable the rehearsal. And that process of bringing that together so that when they present to the senior leaders, they've simplified it and brought it through these formats and had a shared method and have a culture around coming to stage and bringing it forward. That's where I think we have to go, because ultimately we have to get it to the next level, which is to get it simple enough to get it for the field.
And one last question for you, John, that I didn't prepare you for, but I thought I'd throw it in there anyway. I was just thinking of it now. So what role would partners have to play in preparing NetHope and our members to actually the reality of the field data, to prepare them better to start thinking that way and to work with data in the field?
Partners and our technical partners have an enormous capacity. They're bringing in people who have technical skills that we don't necessarily have in the sector. They have tool sets that enable us to do new things. At the same time, we have a practical experience of working in really tough conditions, doing some pretty amazing work that's mostly people-driven, and have ethical code that needs to be embedded in the private sector. It's sort of this partnership feedback loop so that we can embed the practical knowledge that we do from our work into the technology and then bring that technology back into the field. And creating this feedback loop is something that technical partners would be invaluable. And we've seen it. And, Cisco has been a really great example of how this works. Not too many people have a tactical operations team, but that process of building that capacity up, that's where I think we could see a lot of change.
Great, thanks, John. So we'll switch gears a bit here, maybe back to the bottom part of the pyramid to some degree, but maybe a more practical or more sustainable look at things and how to do things. Disaster response really looks at connectivity maybe on a shorter term, a more temporary basis. But if we look at a lot of the different crises we're working in, refugees, migrants, they're longer term. And what is the standard statistic that most refugees are in a camp for 17 years? So, I mean, the reality is that those are much longer term situations, and we need to look at how do we deliver services in those longer term contexts. So one of the things we're looking at is demand aggregation. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to give Ray a chance to actually talk about something else that maybe is underneath the bottom of that pyramid itself, and how do we, before we can bring technology and use connectivity and ICT in a country, we need to think about the policies and regulations. And some of the work that Ray is working with USAID on in Liberia and Pakistan and Afghanistan is around policy. So maybe you can talk about that for a few minutes first.
Sure. I'm actually a little jealous because my colleague Tim here is behind me. I didn't supply a photo of myself. First of all, just to add the intro, I didn't know I was supposed to give a longer intro than just my name and title, but the last 15 years I've worked with donors such as USAID and CETA and DFID and UNICEF, and in the field, living and working in the field, including in Pakistan. And before I go further, could I have a show of hands? This is morning calisthenics. Who here are from NetHope members or other NGOs? Just sort of raise your hand. Awesome. Okay. So for those of you with long memory, I am, for what it's worth, the second newest member of NetHope team, but I've learned the history of USAID funding directly to NetHope in the past 8 years has been sort of curious and odd and sometimes seemingly in conflict with what our members are doing. And I'm happy to say that we, in partnership with USAID, have increasingly focused our institutional funding in support of our members. And through a few months I've been with NetHope in these past 3.5 days, I've started to learn that NetHope is a little bit different for each person. They're giving something different, whether it's disaster preparedness or data analytics. But in general, we're trying to create an enabling environment for our members and support them from differing angles. So what I do in partnership with USAID and other institutional donors is below the bottom of the pyramid or actually at a higher level, it's really about you. And I can't repeat that enough, but I know that that's not been repeated frequently in the past. So to that end, we have been partnering with USAID to look at, for example, policy issues. Currently, we have a program in Afghanistan, one in Pakistan, and also one in Liberia, looking at the regulatory environment for issuing licenses for mobile operators, for the creation of universal access funds, which will allow the telcos and the MNOs to extend access to remote parts of these countries. A lot of these parts of these countries where your members and your offices exist, because we recognize that sort of raises all the boats. It creates a better ecosystem where our members can better attain their goals. And the reason I mentioned my intro once again is because I know what that's about, because I've worked out in the field for so many years. We're also working on mobile money solutions. Who here, by another show of hands, for morning calisthenics, works with mobile money, like payments to your providers or suppliers or even your employees? Okay, smaller show of hands, but a few in the back, they're scared in the back. Well, for those who've worked with mobile and digital financial services, you'll know that the integration of that into your stakeholders expands the access of of financial markets to a greater sector and a greater population of our host countries. And whether it's us personally using mobile money to pay for our vendors or for our employers, or if it's just simply creating an ecosystem, for example, triumphed by M-Pesa in Kenya, that's being replicated elsewhere, this actually expands the access of financial services to those who otherwise wouldn't. And so with USAID funding, we have worked with the governments of Uganda, Rwanda, and recently completed a study in Nigeria, trying to find ways to help the regulators change the ecosystem so that there's an entry point for this. For example, in Nigeria, currently, at this moment in time, the only operators who can use mobile money are the banks. But unfortunately, the banks don't have presence in a lot of rural and underpopulated areas. And so we are encouraging them to expand that to other players. And so once again, we are trying to create an enabling environment on behalf of our members, thanks to our institutional donors, so that you can do your work even better. And lastly, we're also just at the beginning stage of working with the government of Rwanda and the USAID mission there to execute a study on EdTech, technology and education programs, to see and ascertain what actually works. So much of us operate in silos, and I get it because I've been with implementing partners for well over a decade, and we hide our data, we protect our data because it's critical to how we do our jobs. But on a disaggregated level, there's a lot of data about what has worked and what has not. And sometimes, and for my colleagues here from USAID and DFID who may still be in the room, you all know quite well that information doesn't bubble to the top. And so as a convener of our members and as a trusted partner, we can go to donors like USAID and encourage that sharing of data and then share that data back to you. Now, back to the star of the show, behind me, is he still there? Yeah, he's still there. We also work at sort of a lower level, and it's about how can we avail technology better to our members, so once again, they can do their work better. And I'd like my colleague Tim to talk about what we've begun in Uganda and what hopefully will be coming to a country near you. Tim?
Hi, everyone. Can we put a picture of Ray behind?
Yeah, there's no picture of Ray. I'm wiser than that.
Yeah, Ray kind of took over there, so you're straight to you. Go for it.
I really feel like we needed to do that. So I think we all agree that internet connectivity is really very important for many of us and the NGOs doing the work in the region. It's used as a tool to help improve a lot of the programming that we do. So one of the things that USAID started about early 2017 with NetHope was that they really realized that there was a big need for connectivity in a number of the regions, especially since Uganda had started having a big influx of refugees in the West Nile region. We then decided to contact a number of our members and find out a lot of information about what they're doing in these regions, how much they're paying, and then we realized that they were paying so much money for connectivity. This problem wasn't a singular problem that was affecting only one NGO. It was actually a cross-cutting problem across the country. You'd find that they'd have cheaper pricing in more the central city like Kampala, but up when you go out north, they had very high pricing, and that's, of course, because of the cost of delivery. I'll give you an example. In West Nile alone, Yumbe area, which supports Bidi, there's about 80 different NGOs that are actually situated there supporting the work in Bidi, the refugees in Bidi. Through the aggregation of, through the data that we collected, we then realized we could aggregate a lot of this data, use it as a kind of base information piece for the mobile network operator and come back and say, listen, can you give better pricing for our members and USAID implementing partners? We will all agree that if you went alone to a mobile network operator and said, listen, we're from MTI and we'd want to have internet connectivity at about 10 of our sites, you might get a better price than you would get from a single office, operating in one district somewhere. But it's a different conversation when you go and say, listen, all our members represent about over 300 sites across the country, and we want a price for that. This got many of the mobile network operators interested in listening and engaging in dialogue. So eventually, through that process, our real wins began sometime late April when we managed to get a pricing that reflects 48% discounted pricing for all our members across the country. And we got this price from Airtel, at which point we got a donation from Cisco with Meraki access points, and we had a team from Cisco come in and help out in the installations of this work in the West Nile region. We had Rami had been driving that the Cisco installation piece from the back end. We had Sulin come in, Jovan, Matt, people from Cisco. Jovan is from Mexico. So this kind of support was very crucial to kind of the beginning of this. That real win was also one of the things that actually brought about that pricing was that we had to seed the market with about 20 meg. So we made a decision and said, can we pick out 10 different NGOs that put their hand up and say, listen, we're interested in this program. So the first 10 NGOs that come on board, NetHope would find some funding to pay for 2 MB of internet for each of them in this region. The 10 NGOs that came up or the first ones that you see, the seeding, which are in blue, that's CARE, C10, DRC. You can read. I know we can all read. So that seeding was very effective because at the point we started in May at 20 MB, right now, 5 months later, we're looking at a collective MB amount of 123. This is 5 months later. So 123 MB, which has now come on board, and as this is data as of a week ago, which represents about $240,000 of savings annually as a collective for these NGOs. What we also realized is that you will not see those savings. I know many of you might get back to the people in Uganda and say, hey, I know we're saving money here, can you give us the numbers? That's not the case. What we realized is that because they have a budget for internet connectivity, that we found that they were consuming a lot more. When they get that discount, they would then say, okay, if I was getting in $1,000, I was getting so much, 5 MB, now that I have that reduced by 48%, let's have, give me 10 MB, and that now started kind of reflecting in their programming. This is what we realized that they were doing. Fast forward to, so that the projected, I think the next slide. Is this one? No.
One more?
Okay. So the projected, the planned uptake that we have between now and December is probably going to go well above 120. It should probably hit about 200 MB. This would probably reflect to a saving of about close to $500,000 annually for the consortium. What we also realize on the other side, what's a win for everyone, is that right now, as to date, the mobile network operator that we brought on board has realized about $280,000 in revenue that they didn't have in May. This is annual revenue. Of course, 5 months, I'm giving figures that would reflect it. They've signed an annual contract, and this is actually, so it's been a win-win for all sides. Moving forward from that, I think what we're looking at is continuing this, and the next country that we're looking at would be Malawi. And after that, we're planning to probably, hopefully, go through that. We will be reaching out to a number of our members. This is why one of the things he mentioned is it's really important to have this kind of collective data from our members. Beyond Malawi, we'll be looking at different countries, and I think this is one way of saying we're changing the world through collaboration in some sense. I hope that.
If I could add also, I had the luxury of being part of a workshop the first 2 days of this summit with donors from across the world. And if there's any in the room, you'll nod to this point that they also recognize they don't have enough money and they must answer their phone. And they want to do more with less. And they happily have looked to NetHope as a representative of their 57 members to be able to collectively point them in the direction of what can impact them most. And so to the degree that we can continue a dialogue with our members, we can leverage this external funding in either high level or low level ways, as you wish to put it, to help everybody in this room accomplish their said goals. We don't have to actually even know what those goals are, but we do know that if you want to do digital development, you need bandwidth. That's easy. That's an easy win. And so not only will we work in Malawi, and we've chosen Malawi with our funder because we have data that's where most pain points are from our members. So all of you or your members have been queried on this, so that's how that was chosen. But this is, aggregating internet demand is just the first of what may be many interventions.
Well, Ray and Tim really prepared themselves well for the questions because they answered all of my questions already. But maybe one more to add on there before we move on. It's been quite successful and a really great outcome, but has there been challenges? And do you foresee any more challenges going forward with this with the pricing model, with demand aggregation as a whole?
Yeah, I think one of the the few things that would be very good to take away from this model is that one thing you mentioned earlier, which is policy. Different countries have different modes of operation. They have different national broadband strategies. They have different markets, So one of the things that would really kind of make this sustainable would be finding a way to incorporate it into the national broadband strategy as something that regulators can actually look at and say, listen, this is actually useful, because mobile network operators actually need to have a base, some source of revenue that kind of represents it backs up the reason that they would go and invest in these rural regions. So regarding, challenges, I think there's been a couple of them where but they've been able to cover at least close to 95% of all the sites we gave them. But I know that there's always that 5% that we would probably, that they can't get to, and it would cost them a lot more to kind of invest to get to those regions. So even as we look at different countries, we're not just going to look at mobile network operators. It will be very key to look at, satellite providers, look at just across the board. That's our second thing. Would be another challenge I foresee is we all are in the technology sector, so it's probably worth thinking about to say, what would it be like in a few years when developments come forth that we cannot control, things outside our control? What if this model in a year is obsolete? What if we have to think ahead of that? And these are some of the things that we're starting to think about and going to start addressing.
Great, thanks, Ray. And
if
Ray,
I could I just want to add something to this, because it involves John's team actually as well. It involves the execution of analytics. So a lot of these governments that we are engaging with, a lot of it thanks to donors who are making these introductions, they don't have any visualization of data whatsoever in their country. They know the boundaries of their country often. They know the mayors or the governors, the provincial heads, but they don't actually know where there are people and needs. And we've discovered there's an untapped need for that kind of information. And going forward, again, I'm the new guy, but going forward, the more that we can provide that to our government partners, the more that we can actually create, as I said before, this enabling environment for our members to work.
That's great. Thanks to both. And thanks, Grace, for being graceful and waiting to listen to all of us talk for the last hour almost. But we'll switch gears again, maybe towards the top of the pyramid. Link that in with the Uganda work, and Grace and Mercy Corps were one of the award recipients from the Google Challenge, so we'll just quickly show now a video of the work that was done there in Uganda.
My name is Tim Beatty. I work for NetHope on the connectivity project in partnership with USAID in North Uganda in the West Nile region. A lot of the NGOs in the northern region are responding to big influx of refugees from South Sudan. A lot of NGOs have high need, and one of these needs is certainly connectivity. It's first of all important in having to be able to communicate, get up-to-date statistics, get up-to-date communication and information from the people who are working in the camps. It's also equally important for the refugees in the country, because many of them get here, they have no phones, they don't have access to internet, they can't reach their relatives and find out where they are or where they ended up or if they're still alive.
What is one of the first things that you do in the beginning of the day? You check your phone. So imagine someone who doesn't have a phone and isn't able to access any of that information. So one of the really interesting things that we've been doing with NetHope is providing access to basic phones for refugees. Over 20,000 phones that we're able to have refugees do a cost share with us on. So they pay some money and we subsidize it, and we work with a local telecommunications company.
That project is called the Device Challenge, and these phones are now being sold at very low prices to the host community as well as the refugees. With that kind of digital penetration, you get to find that many of these refugees can reach their loved ones, find out where they ended up. Some of them have started businesses.
I have a small shop. I can sell things like sugar, eggs, airtime, small batteries, rice. I'm using my phone to call for my suppliers to find a best price, so that I go on the board to bring and sell for my customers in my village, and also can help me in communication to meet my friends. Even there are some people who are still back in South Sudan, I will connect them through my phone.
A lot of the engagement with digital devices gets them into, tapped into this other community, connected with the rest of the world.
So not only are we making a business case for a local employer to spread their network coverage and to provide additional access to mobile money so that people can save more, they can transfer money home if they want to, they can receive money from their family members back in South Sudan. It increases their financial stability. It also increases their access to information around security. In addition, for those that are elderly and a bit more vulnerable, there's a huge impact that basic phone technology has on their ability to be able to access health services. And then for young people, there's also an ability to access social network platforms, which just brings a sense of connectedness when otherwise people can feel very disenfranchised.
We thrive on access to information. We as human beings benefit from access to information. Why should we deny the refugees the same? At the end of the day, there won't be refugees forever. The end goal here for them is to make their process, this path that they've actually gotten onto, beneficial for them in a way that when they leave, when they go out into the world elsewhere, they can make something of themselves.
Great. So Grace, as being a big part of what was going on in Uganda, can you talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that came out of this basic mobile connectivity and how it was used to, bring more impact into programs that were happening in Uganda?
Yeah, definitely. So I think when we talk about getting basic mobile technology into the hands of South Sudanese refugees as well as Ugandan host communities, that's one piece, but the other piece is to make sure that those phones are able to amplify the impact of our existing programming as well as the programming of our partners. So some of the ways that we're seeing people and our partners like Save the Children, Oxfam, Dan Church Aid, CARE, all of the groups that we're working with in northern Uganda, cash transfers is one way that people are using mobile technology. So being able to transfer cash to meet basic needs through mobile money instead of giving cash in an envelope. We're looking at just even general feedback, facilitating people's ability to be able to call us and say, hey, this isn't going well, or it is going well, and how can we adapt? Community monitoring when it comes to protection challenges or gender-based violence. Those are also ways that the phones are really helping people access protection services in the way that they need to. Micro-enterprise businesses being supported in terms of through smartphone technology that we were able to provide through the Device Challenge, mentoring of businesses, even just being able to connect different entrepreneurs together, being able to help them track their spending and do better budgeting. And then we're also seeing it in terms of we work with a social enterprise that actually trains our farmers. So subsistence agriculture is obviously a huge part of the lifestyle in northern Uganda. And we work with farmers to train them on good planting practices. And then we actually have a company that buys back their produce at the end of the season to be able to provide additional income. And that company that we're working with is using the device challenge devices and the phone numbers and the SIM cards that people have registered to do push SMS messages around market prices as well as timely planting advice. So that's just a few of the examples of how we're seeing the devices being used to amplify existing programming.
Great. And what kind of scale were you able to achieve? And can you talk a little bit about your distribution model for the devices and how that worked?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start with the distribution model. The first step for us was to do a competitive tender process. So we were looking to engage a company that had an existing presence in northern Uganda, that was interested in expanding its network access as well as customer base, specifically within the refugee settlements, so with vulnerable populations. And Airtel won that tender. So we actually had a direct service contract with Airtel where we subsidized the basic phone, 75% of the value of the basic phones directly to Airtel. We then went to different villages across 3 different refugee settlements in northern Uganda that we were working in, and we identified particularly entrepreneurial people that maybe had a business in South Sudan previously, had a bit of business know-how and enough kind of initial capital to be able to pay Airtel for the 25%, the remainder of that value of the phone. And then we worked with local leaders and our program team on the ground to identify people who were particularly vulnerable and who couldn't have accessed a mobile device outside of this kind of highly subsidized model. So we linked Airtel directly to these village traders. Traders would place an order to Airtel, and Airtel within 24 or 48 hours would come and actually deliver the phones specifically to these villages, because most of the people we were working with couldn't travel all the way into town to get to an Airtel shop. And so right on the spot when people are buying a phone, they get their free SIM card, they get it registered, and then Airtel trains them in just basic digital literacy. How do you put the battery into the phone? How do you turn the phone on? And then we actually supplement with trainings with Airtel on mobile money, not just Airtel Money, but all of the different mobile money platforms in case people want to use different providers. And then basic budgeting and savings as well. And through that model, we've been able to sell, right now, because it's still ongoing, but we've been able to sell over 16,000 mobile phones, and that's with people paying about $2.50 a phone. So if you think about purchasing power of refugees, that's about $32,000 that we've been able to engage with Airtel, and that's reaching about 80,000 people if you think about a phone supporting a household.
Great. And from Mercy Corps, in the context you work, are there some key lessons learned, and where do you see things kind of going forward for the next approach, I guess?
Yeah, so I think in terms of lessons learned, the low level of digital literacy, I think that's something we were expecting when we designed the program, but I think we still needed to kind of adapt and reevaluate as it went on. I was saying yesterday during one of the presentations that, we had people taking the batteries that are still in the plastic wrappers and putting them in the phones, and then turning the phone or trying to turn the phone on and being like, the phone is broken, So the level of digital literacy, we really had to adapt to that and make sure that the trainings were able to actually support people's ability to use these phones. So that was, I think, a lesson learned. I think the power of a subsidized model to show market potential, we felt like was really interesting. We did actually get some pushback, I think, in a context that's a protracted crisis, where you have long time frames, and sometimes you have a kind of a traditional humanitarian mindset. There's a lot of direct distribution and fully subsidized goods that are being provided to people. And then we come in and kind of are asking for a cost share from people who are vulnerable. And a lot of people pushed back on that. It was like, how can you do that? But we really feel like if these people are going to be in Uganda between 5 to 20 years, which are the estimates, they're not going to be able to have access to goods and services. We're not going to be able to work with private sector partners if we don't show some type of purchasing power and market potential. So I felt like that was a lesson learned. And we were able to show people, like, if this is a good and a service that people want, they are willing to pay. So yeah, and I think then the village trader model, just making sure that we worked really hard with Airtel to train these village traders so that, after Mercy Corps is gone, these people who've purchased a phone, they still have a resource to go to ask questions. And a lot of those village traders actually became mobile money agents, which for us is super important because it means that Airtel has built that relationship with them. It means they have enough capital to actually be an agent. And it means that maybe we can, over the long term, move a little bit away from people getting cash transfers and immediately cashing out. Maybe we can get to more usage of mobile money services. So.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
And just to maybe tie it all together here, we're getting near the end of the session. I think we've tried to demonstrate what we've, in a very small sample size of what NetHope and the partners and members have done this past year. And to kind of bring things forward a little bit, I apologize for this picture. Being Canadian, I had to apologize at least once. But I've been trying to really conceptualize how we're going to do all of this and what it all means. And we've talked a lot about the technology part, and that seems to be something we're quite good at, how we bring that in, how we provide that kind of a service. The people side, we're working on that now with preparedness and training and trying to get that capacity building up, and we'll do that. We should do that on the other end as well. If we're going to hand over any of the things we're bringing in, we need to bring up the capacity and the skill set of those that we're handing this over to. Process we still need to work on as well. The middle part, that's not really, don't worry, that's not in any way set in stone. That's sort of just my mind dump, is working with a little bit with Lauren on what the areas could be, but I really want to work with the members to figure out what should those kind of silos be, or not silos, but what should those maybe thematic areas be that we want to work on based on what the members' needs are, and see how partners can fit in to support that. And then when we have that all sorted out, kind of how do we bring all that up to a real digital service or digital aid delivery in the end. So that's kind of the next step for me, working with the team to try to get ourselves to that step. Knowing that that bottom level will always be there, we'll always need to, in certain situations, especially sudden onset emergencies, we'll need to think about how we bring in that very basic level of connectivity and power and infrastructure, but how do we bring things to the next level? We talk about CDN on the HQ side, more like sort of on the HQ side, but we can bring that thoughts into this program side as well, and how do we digitalize what we do in programs on the ground. So first I wanted to thank the members, and I know Rami wanted to say something in particular, so I'll just give him a second here.
Yeah, I've been saying thank you all week, so I just want to continue saying thank you. But, I just want to, for members especially, we don't have the capacity in staff, for example, to run the operations that we have in Greece, Northern Uganda, Guatemala, Puerto Rico, now Colombia. It's really the members who go a bit further to support us in addition to all the work that they have is what makes it work. And I want to just have thank yous for many people, but specifically a few people who really have consistently been supporting us. And I just want to be grateful for that. Mark Hawkins from Save the Children, please stand up. So, yeah. Mark is a genius in his own rights. I mean, he's really got the technical industry down, supports us with training, advice, and very dedicated to NetHope. Jovan, please stand up for Mercy Corps. So Jovan in northern Uganda, and Greece. Greece is actually a huge, huge success because of the support we got from Jovan. If you want your A team to get in, do the job, Jovan is part of it. Josh Overby, please stand up. From Samaritan's Purse, Josh always shares a lot of important information, sit-reps, how they can support us logistically. Samaritan's Purse did a fantastic job in responding to Hurricanes Irma and Maria, and we're really grateful for everything that you've done and looking forward to doing more with you, Josh. And last but not least, amigo, Christian Alfaro. Believe it or not, he's always smiling like that. So Christian was phenomenal in supporting us in coordination efforts, speaking Spanish, of course, in Puerto Rico, Guatemala. It was basically solely Christian coordinating. So thank you so much again to all of you. Well, Matt is not a member. We all love Matt, but he's a part of us. So Matt, please stand up. Yeah.
That was the next slide.
Oh, that was the next slide. Okay,
Yeah.
I was waiting for the next slide.
I mean, and I promise by next year I will know every one of the organizations, but I have to admit I didn't memorize all 57. There's always one that pops up like, oh, yeah, okay, I forgot about that one. But hopefully after 14 months, I'll have a better view on all of that. And we'd also like to thank, of course, the partners, and maybe you have a partner you want to thank.
Yes, so 2 people here. Matt, can you stand up now? So with Matt, the challenge with him is we have to kick him out of emergencies, okay, to take a break. And LP from Ericsson Response, can you please stand up? With LP, our challenge was getting him off the tower to get him on a plane to go take a break. So thank you, LP and Ericsson. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rami.
If I could.
Yeah, John.
In order to do the new data analyses that particularly make use of bigger data sets, we've benefited from quite a number of partners and members who have participated in this, including some of which I had intended in my notes to thank in the slide itself. The Red Cross movement has done an amazing job of providing access to several teams that have enabled us to take the data from Facebook and turn it into the population maps that you saw. And I think Dale Kuntz, who's not here, and his team deserve an enormous amount of credit for the amount of time they took in, along with Andrew Schroeder, who, Andrew, are you in the room? Andrew from Direct Relief, the Director of Research and Analysis, has spent an enormous amount of time not only making analyses available, but teaching as well. And then the whole Facebook team has just been fantastic at helping us not only build up the practice, but also the building up entirely new tool chains in order to protect the data while making it available. So I wanted to give credit to that. And then do we have Laura and Mercedes here? Mercedes, please stand up. Thank you.
Anyone else? So I have the same sentiment for the partners. I promise to know who you are next year as well. A lot of people I walked up to this week are, where are you from? What do you do? I've never heard of you before, but that's obviously a thing I need to figure out a bit more. But again, by next year, I hope to know you all much, much better. But again, just wanted to thank everyone who supported us throughout the year. I know Chris is not here, but he looks particularly happy in the middle there with his role in the training. But I think everyone's had a great time in these things, and I think the collective impact and how we've all worked together as partners, as members, as NetHope has been amazing. And I've really come into what I think is a fantastic team and a great area to explore. And I look forward to working with all of you more in the future. Thanks.